Use the graph of y equals the square root of x to graph y minus 2 equals negative square root of x plus 3. And then what are the domain and range of our new graph? So again, a couple of things. This time we notice that there is no function notation. Everything is an explicit notation. And once again, just like we've done in every other time, we're going to take the time to move things over. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides. And maybe I noticed that this one is not in factored form. What parts do we need to look at for factored form is whenever you have a horizontal stretch, compression, or reflection and horizontal translation, which we do, we have a horizontal compression and a horizontal translation, it needs to be in factored form. So what we have to do is we have to factor the 3 out, leaving us with x plus 1. So now when we label things from left to right, the negative is going to be outside the function, so it's vertical. A negative is a reflection. We have a vertical reflection. We're going to multiply our y value by a negative 1. Our 3 is inside the square root, so it's inside the function. It's going to affect things horizontally, and it's going to be a compression because we remember with all of our stretches and compressions horizontally, we always multiply by the reciprocal. So if there's a 3, our x values are going to get multiplied by 1/3. Plus 1 is still inside the square root. That's going to be horizontal. Horizontal translation, 1 to the left. And the plus 2 is outside, a vertical translation, 2 up. What are some key points on our original graph? Well, you will always include 0, 0 as a point that you start with because that's where a square root graph starts. Choosing other points, you can choose whichever other points you like. However, sometimes you might end up dealing with fractions depending on the point you choose. So sometimes some thought beforehand and trying to say, this is what I'll have to do. I have to multiply y by negative 1, x by 1/3, move it 1 to the left, move it 2 down. What would be a point that I could choose so that if I did those things, I still end up with nice whole numbers? If I choose 4, 2, right, that's a point right on the graph right there. My x value is going to be 4. Am I going to end up with a fraction when I get to have to multiply by 1/3? Yes. It could work, and it would work. You just would have to work with 4/3. And if you don't mind subtracting 1 from 4/3 or doing those kind of math things, it's perfectly fine. If you have no problem graphing 4/3 or things like that, no problem. But if you wanted to avoid that fraction, what point would do that? 9 and 3. So we've got that point right here, 9, 3. If I choose 9, 3, when I multiply my x values by 1/3, I'll still end up with a whole number. So that's not saying that choosing 4, 2 is wrong. It just means you have to work with fractions. Now we set up our arrows first, stretches and compressions, then translations. And in doing that, we can label above here, well, I'm going to have to multiply y by negative 1 and x by 1/3. And here I need to move 1 to the left and 2 up. And so what happens to my points? Well, x by 1/3, this will still stay 0. This one becomes 3, and that's why we chose that point. Y by negative 1, this would still be 0, but this will become negative 3. Now we need to move everything 1 to the left, so that'll be negative 1, and this will be 2. And finally move everything 2 up, that'll be 2, and this will be negative 1. So what does that mean for my new graph? And again, whenever possible for your new graph, I suggest putting it on a new grid. Sometimes an exam will say to graph it on the same grid that you have. In this case, we'll have the point -1, -1, comma 2. -1, comma 2. And we'll also have the point 2, -1. And now we have those 2 points, and we need to graph something that has the right shape that's similar to the shape that we started with. So first of all, I'm going to make a note that 0, 0 is my starting point. So my starting point here, 0, 0, where did that one end up? That one ended up at -1, comma 2. That's my starting point here. And now you have 2 choices. I'm going to draw them in a pen that erases, because one is going to be right and one's going to be wrong. You have to go from that point to that point and maintain this shape. So the question is, should it go like this or should it go like this? Both of those have somewhat the right shape, but which one is it going to be? So in this case, think through, what does a vertical reflection do? My vertical reflection would make it go down. X by 1/3 would squish it towards my x-axis. Then I'm going to move 1 to the left, and finally I'm going to move 2 up. What's the shape that I need to end up with? My shape ends up going like this. And so we have our final graph. We've labeled 2 points. We've done all the transformations. This question asked us for our new domain and range of just the green graph. So the domain, our x values have to be bigger than or equal to -1. And our range, our y values, are less than or equal to 2. Questions for practice? Numbers 8 and 10.